here. So my name is Mark Phillip, and I'm an application engineer at Studica Incorporated. And a little bit about Studica is we're a software and hardware reseller, and we primarily deal with schools, educational institutions, whether it's K through 12 or colleges, universities, and pretty much every realm of education we deal with, whether it's students or faculty or administrators. We have been doing this for a little over 30 years, so we have a lot of people who work here who have a lot of expertise in the educational realm. And Babbel is a language learning program that we picked up recently and we're pretty excited about, so we're just trying to get the word out there and kind of let everybody know what it's all about and why it might be useful for you at your school or in your academic life. I'm also joined today with my colleague, Christy Leitner, who's going to be monitoring the chat for me. She's our marketing director, and so she's the one who's probably been emailing everybody about the webinar, if you've been getting emails from us. And my contact information is here on this slide, and our website is studica.com if you want to look at that at any point. So we'll basically be looking at kind of why language learning is important in the 21st century, essentially, and some of the trends in language learning. And then we'll be looking at what is Babbel, why is it useful, and some of the main features of Babbel. And I'll also go through a quick demonstration of Babbel to kind of show you what it's all about. So I'll go ahead and jump into it now. So the first thing I want to talk about is the importance of language learning. And when we talk about language learning, we're basically talking about learning a second language, right? And most of what I'm going to be talking about is related to the United States. So if you're from a different country, I apologize. Not all my stats are going to be catered to wherever it is you live, but at least in the United States, we're seeing an increasing number of bilingual speakers in the country, which is driving demand for people learning second languages to be able to better communicate with the other people around them. We're also seeing language requirements at the collegiate level that are requiring language learning, and I'll talk more about these points as we go through the presentation. And I'm also going to hit on globalization. And for people who don't know, globalization is kind of the idea of breaking down trade barriers and the global economy and how that's been increasing in the last couple decades. And basically, what does that mean for language learning? And how is that kind of shifting what languages people are learning? And I guess you could say the job demand for people who are bilingual, like how is that being affected by the increase in the global economy? And then the last point, which I don't have specific slides about, but I did want to make mention of, is the health and well-being. There's actually a lot of really interesting research on how bilingualism affects cognitive development as well as cognitive decline in your twilight years. And basically all the research points to bilingualism being a net benefit for cognition. And so there's a lot of interesting studies on this, and I do recommend if this is a field that's kind of interesting to you, there's a lot of interesting resources in academic journals that have been published. So I do recommend looking into that. But the upshot is that bilingualism as a whole is actually good for your health and well-being. And so there is a big push using this as the reason. There's been a big push for teaching more and more people secondary languages just for the health benefits as well. Nothing necessarily related to job prospects or the economy. So the first stat that I've got here is what we're seeing is essentially the population who are 5 years or older that are speaking a language other than English at home in the United States. And the data we have is in 2010, 2015, and projected data for 2020. This comes from the U.S. Census Bureau, and it was based on projections from 2008. And basically what we're seeing is pretty straightforward. Over time, we're seeing more and more people 5 years and older who are speaking a language other than English at the home. That doesn't necessarily mean that those people are only speaking the other language. It's entirely possible they're bilingual. But basically the trend is suggesting that more and more people are speaking a second language. And these numbers are in the millions, by the way. So we actually see by 2020, 71.8 million people speaking a second language at home. And so why does this matter? In a way, it's because the more people who do speak multiple languages, the more normalized bilingualism becomes, and that's going to start encouraging other people to seek out learning a different language, and it's going to basically drive more demand for language learning and language education. And this will help, a lot of people might see this for economic reasons, like they want to be able to communicate with their coworkers or their peers at school better, right? There might be personal reasons. Maybe somebody's friend or family member or significant other comes from a family who speaks a different language than them, and so they feel a desire to learn that language to better speak with them. So as more and more people speak the languages, second languages, it helps drive that demand to learn a second language yourself if you're a monolingual speaker. And so this is going to be a part of a driving force in language learning demand as the years go on and more people are speaking multiple languages. And we've seen this already in countries in Europe, for instance, where language education is a really big deal, and people, even in K through 12 in Europe, in many European countries, are often expected to be able to speak 2 or 3 languages, and that's pretty much the norm over there. So we're starting to see something kind of similar start in the United States. On the topic of language requirements, some of the data that I found was pretty interesting. Approximately 50% of higher education institutions in the US have a language requirement, and that comes from the Modern Language Association, which is basically an organization that analyzes all sorts of statistics related to language learning and bilingualism, or polylingualism, I think it's called, multilingual rather. So what this means is basically 50% of colleges, universities require you to have taken some sort of language learning course before you can graduate with a bachelor's degree, and in some cases even an associate's degree. So what this means for K-12 schools, at least, is that you can better prepare your students for their college life and for their academic career by getting them started early with language learning. And study after study has basically shown that the younger a person is, the more capable they are of adopting a language and retaining it they retain it much better than an adult who's doing the same thing. So kids are at more of a disadvantage if they're going into college at 18, 19, 20 years old or later, and they've never had any sort of language education. They're at a much larger disadvantage than a kid who maybe took a Spanish course when they were in junior high or high school. So what these stats here are showing is basically the percentage of institutions that have developed some kind of international or global learning outcome, and basically those outcomes are often bundled in with language. So you take some kind of language course and it satisfies that requirement, for instance. And so we see between 2006-2011 stats, we've seen an increase across the board for all types of degrees between 2006-2011. There's more and more schools requiring this. At the doctoral level, you have 80% of schools are requiring it, and you kind of just go down from there. But even at the bachelor's level, which is what most people who go into college, that's what they're seeking to get, you have 69% of schools as of 2011. This number's probably gone up since then, but I couldn't find more recent data. But you have 69% of colleges basically requiring you to take some kind of language course. So yeah, like I said, the point is basically that how can you better prepare your students if you're in K through 12? How can you prepare those students for these requirements in college? And if you work at a college or or a university, then you have to be thinking like, what kind of solutions do I have to provide the best learning or language education that I can to my students who are seeking their degrees. So there's a lot of considerations here, and the demand for language learning basically is increasing over time at the college level. So globalization and job prospects, I already kind of defined what globalization is, but just to repeat, it's basically the idea of having a global economy, a world market where trade barriers are kind of being broken down, and different countries all over the world are now trading with each other, and this is causing a huge increase in basically multinational businesses, or multinational corporations is how they're frequently referred to. And these entities are employing thousands of people across all sorts of different disciplines. And what we're seeing is, due to the nature of the global economy and how many cultures are interacting with each other and how many people are speaking different languages, there's this big push to basically find qualified people who also can speak a language that the business needs to operate within a certain sector of the world, the global economy. And what the result is here is that we're seeing an increased number of jobs that are seeking bilingual employees. And what's interesting about this demand is that it's spread across all different types of jobs. It's not just like high wage jobs or low wage jobs. It's actually spread pretty evenly across all the different prestiges of jobs. And I have a graph about that on the next slide. And basically, it's emerging economies that are largely increasing this demand. So economies that are kind of going through an industrial revolution or having these big boom cycles right now, where there's a lot of money and investment opportunities, where businesses, say in the United States, are taking advantage of that. And basically, they want to do business in these countries. And part of how they can effectively do that is by having employees who know how to speak the language and who know how to navigate the cultural norms of the country. To be able to do their job effectively. The figure that I have here is the number of online job listings for workers with bilingual skills. So basically job listings that are looking for people with bilingual skills. The data is from 2010 and 2015. And what we see is within a 5-year period, we've seen more than double the number of online job postings for workers with bilingual skills. One thing I want to note about this data, because I think it can be a little deceiving, is between 2010 and 2015, part of what might make up that difference is just the fact that the internet infrastructure for like job sites got more comprehensive. So, in 2010, you might have only had one or two decent job websites like monster.com, right? That was a popular one. But then by 2015, you had like LinkedIn, and you probably had Indeed and Glassdoor and all these other websites where there's a lot more data to potentially have. So I don't know if the numbers are entirely because businesses need that many more people, or if it's just that there was more services to provide job searches, for instance. But regardless, the numbers have increased. It'd be interesting to see a data that controlled for that factor. So the graphs that I have here is basically what we see on the left is what I was talking about with prestige. It's the change in the share of jobs targeting bilingual workers from 2010 to 2015 as a percentage. And when we talk about prestige is kind of abstractly defined. When I read the study related to this data, they basically said that prestige was a measure that they polled like thousands of people about the prestige that they thought a job had. So it's kind of like a perceived prestige. And what this means is like most people, what they say, how prestigious do you think a surgeon is as a job? Most people would probably put that pretty high. Whereas somebody who asked, what prestige do you think a custodian is? A lot of people would probably put that on the lower end of prestige. So when we talk about prestige, that's basically what that means. But what we see is that the demand for bilingual jobs is actually spread pretty evenly outside of the low and middle prestige. But we have pretty much the largest shares in the lowest and the high prestige. And I think the high prestige is being driven largely by banks and basically people who are working in banks that are catering to these emerging economies and the businesses who have to store money someplace and transfer money. And so they're looking for bilingual employees to be able to deal with these multinational businesses that are booming in these emerging economies. But the upshot of that is that no matter what job you're doing, there's actually an increased demand regardless for bilingual employees or people who speak more than one language. The figure on the right is basically showing the employers and kind of the industries that they're in who have the highest demand for bilingual workers. And kind of like I mentioned, a lot of these are going to be banks and insurance and telecom companies. And that kind of makes sense. Like I said, banks are trying to cater to the money needs of these booming emerging economies. Your telecom companies are catering to the infrastructure needs of these emerging economies to get, say, broadband and 4G, 5G networks everywhere. And then you have insurance companies, which is a bit interesting. I don't quite know how to explain that one. because I don't know a lot about insurance. But yeah, so we do see that there's just a large number of jobs and companies who are looking for bilingual employees. So the point here is that for students, if they are bilingual, they automatically give themselves an edge when looking for a job in almost any sector of the economy. I mean, even in businesses that aren't necessarily catering to multilingual business practices, most people still see bilingualism as a net benefit in a candidate who's applying for a job, and that's something that will give students an edge on their resume, and it will most likely help them at some point in their professional career. So educators, educators need to be thinking about how can we facilitate language learning in a comprehensive, easy to understand way for our students so that we can give them that edge. So now I want to talk about some of the current trends in language learning, and I kind of don't like the term trend because it implies like it's not a permanent thing, but a lot of these approaches actually have shown a lot of promise, and the studies are kind of favoring them as a long-term solution, but it's still relatively new ground. But I'll be talking about blended learning, language immersion, and distance learning. So language immersion is this approach where say you're a student in high school and you're taking a Spanish class, you're an English speaker, but you're taking a Spanish class. The language immersion approach says that when you go to class, your whole coursework is going to be delivered in Spanish. Like everything's going to be Spanish. Your teacher's going to speak to you in Spanish. The other students have to speak in Spanish. Like everything about the class is supposed to be done in Spanish. The idea here is, I guess, in a way, it's throw you in the deep end to teach you how to swim, but with some guidance, because you do have an instructor who speaks English, right? So they can speak to you and help you with any difficulties you might have. But at the end of the day, the focus is on making sure you're constantly speaking and having conversation with your classmates and with your teachers, reading books and things like that in Spanish. And the theory behind it is that the more you use the language and the more that you use it in a casual setting, in a way that makes sense to you and in a way that you see a benefit in, the better you're going to retain the information. So a lot of people learn a language just by speaking it regularly and being surrounded by it regularly. So the point of language immersion is to try and, take that idea and utilize it in the classroom. Have all the students talk to each other about their day, right? Like, oh, what did you do this morning? I ate breakfast, watched TV, or did whatever. But you're going to have that conversation in Spanish. And the focus with language immersion is less on memorization and much more on useful dialogue. And in doing so, the students learn a lot more about how can they actually have a conversation with somebody. And that doesn't mean that you totally throw out the idea of learning proper grammar and definitions and things like that. That aspect still exists, but language immersion, it basically means that you're teaching this class in the language that you're trying to learn, not in your native language. And in doing so, you kind of step a little bit out of your comfort zone, but you're put into this realm of, constantly being bombarded with the language, which helps you retain that information and know how to use it. So some of the stats currently in the United States, there's 448 schools that use this approach. And what our graph is showing here is kind of the adoption of the language immersion approach over time. Since 1971 into 2011, we've basically seen a steady increase with a little bit of a lull there in the early to mid 2000s. But then by 2011, we saw this sharp increase. And that's probably related to the success the approach has had in Europe. Many European countries have started using language immersion, and it's been highly successful from what I understand. And another interesting part of this approach is there's a large cultural aspect. There's a lot of focus on learning facts and information about the culture of the people who the language originates from, right? So if you're learning Spanish, there might be a big focus on the Mexican culture, or if you're doing European Spanish, there might be a big focus on, Spain and their culture, for instance. So blended learning is another approach that essentially combines face-to-face instruction with online instruction. So it's like a hybrid approach somewhere between an online class and a face-to-face class, right? And this is an increasingly popular approach, and distance learning approaches are actually increasingly popular in general, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But with blended learning, you still have that face-to-face interaction. There's still a lot of reluctance, I think, for instructors to really go for the full-on distance learning approach, because there is a lot of benefit to the physical approach, to having a face-to-face instruction. And what's nice with blended learning is you don't necessarily sacrifice the face-to-face instruction. And what's also interesting with these approaches is that students in general, studies have basically polled students on this, and overwhelmingly students, they basically favor these approaches more than face-to-face instruction. And they often state that they actually learn better, that they get better grades, and that they actually retain the material that they're learning a lot better than when they're in a physical classroom. Of course, some of that might be biased. It's hard to say, but that's basically what the stats are showing currently. And what's interesting with blended learning is you can kind of take whatever approach you want in the classroom, right? Like if you want to do language immersion, there's no reason you can't take that approach when you have your students meet face-to-face 2-3 times a week, for instance, and then the rest of the week they're doing homework assignments or whatever from their computer at home. So with that, there's also the distance learning approach. And the difference between distance learning and blended learning is basically distance learning is 100% online, right? This is your approach where you can have a student halfway across the country taking a course at a school that's 1,000 miles away from them, right? And this is an increasingly popular approach, and it's actually being heavily adopted by colleges. By 2019, at least 50% of classes in colleges are expected to be delivered online. In my experience, from what I've read, most of these courses are in the general education realm, not necessarily in the major realm or the degree majors. So you're talking more like your English courses or language courses, for instance, are a really popular one for distance learning right now. And a big part of why this is happening is because it's cheap. It's very cheap to actually implement a distance learning program. I mean, once you have your basic infrastructure put into place, like Blackboard or Canvas or whatever system you're using at school, it's really cheap to provide this instruction to students. And so it's helping to drive the cost of tuition down at colleges, which is a huge thing in the age of student debt loan crisis. And, that's basically a benefit for both the school and the students. And like I said on the last slide, students are basically saying that they prefer online courses, that it works with their schedule, that they can go at their own pace, and that they're learning the material better and they're retaining the information more than they do when they have to meet face-to-face. And I think in the college level, this is especially an issue because students often have a lot of responsibilities, whether they're working a job or they have families and, responsibilities outside of school to worry about. Distance learning is really popular in the college realm for that reason, because it's flexible and allows students to kind of do their work on their own terms. Now in the K through 12 sector, we're seeing a lot slower of an adoption for distance learning. We basically see 30 states currently offer some fully online statewide schools. There's actually 20 states that prohibit open enrollment in online schools. 26 states offer virtual schooling, and the stats are basically giving us a mixed bag. It's basically saying a handful of states are kind of on board with this, other ones are actually really reluctant and kind of hostile towards it. But we are seeing that, at least in the private school section, there is a lot more adoption for distance learning, where we're seeing like Chromebook programs and things like that, where students may be allowed to take a device home with them to do homework on and things like that. And that's even happening in the public school sector as well. My assumption on why the adoption is slower here for K through 12 is probably bureaucratic. There's just a lot more rules that public schools are going to have to go through than, say, a college university does. And so it might just be a little bit slower of an adoption for public schools. But the fact is, the distance learning is just another tool in the arsenal for education in general. And it's not that a school has to go 100% distance learning all across the board, but classes such as language learning are actually quite ideal for these sorts of programs precisely because of the software that's available for them, like Babbel. So that's kind of the overview of some of the common trends right now for language learning, and now I want to talk about like what Babbel actually is, since I've given all this background information. So Babbel is basically an online language learning platform. You can get it as a mobile app, you can get it on your computer through your browser. It's highly portable, which is something I'll talk about a little later. It is heavily used in education, and what they focused on is building real-life conversation skills. So they try to focus a little less on just definitions and memorization, and try to actually give you relevant phrasing or relevant conversation skills. Kind of like I was talking with the language immersion approach. People learn better when they have some kind of relatable thing that they can see the material being used for, right? So it leverages your native language to build upon existing grammar and vocabulary skills. That's kind of a fancy way of saying that the content will be delivered to you in your native language. So for instance, if I'm an English speaker learning Spanish, it will ask me to, click on the proper definition for the word hello, right? And it will be printed as hola for Spanish hello. But it's telling me to answer the question in a language I understand, so I'm not completely lost. And it focuses on all the skill sets, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And I'll kind of show you how that works in a little bit. And there's 8,500 hours of content across 14 different languages, with more languages being developed and worked on all the time. So that's kind of the overview of Babbel. And to kind of give you an idea, I'll just show you kind of what Babbel looks like. And quick demonstration, basically, I'll go through a course, kind of show you how they do their learning and how the interface looks. So this is basically the main page. I'm signed into my account and I'm set up for learning Spanish. And what I want to point out first is that this UI that you see here, so this is all in your browser. And what's interesting with Babbel is that they don't actually have, I guess, what you call a software platform, in that you don't get like a disk or something to install on your computer. Everything about Babbel is done through their website or through their app on the mobile devices. What this means is that the program's highly portable. It means that you can get it on just about any device that can connect to the internet and has a web browser that can access this website. So I think you have to have JavaScript. So if you have a device that for whatever reason can't use JavaScript, you might have trouble. But pretty much most computers and pretty much any mobile device is going to be able to access this site and use it. And your interface is going to look pretty much the same across the board. And so if I go onto here, I can look at my courses, and it's going to load. My internet's been a little slow today, so I apologize if it takes a while. So in the Spanish section, I basically have these different I guess you'd call them like units, if you will. So there's new content here, so stuff that they've added to the course that's new. Beginners courses for people like myself who don't know much about the language, grammar courses for reinforcing grammar, and this is actually something that native speakers might use to help reinforce grammar, since grammar is often one of the, I guess, bottlenecks for even native speakers in most languages. A lot of people struggle with grammar, so even if you're a native speaker, you might be able to use this and learn something. There's intermediate courses for the average speaker, essentially intermediate speaker. This course is focused on listening and speaking, so it's much more focused on phonetics and fine-tuning your accent, for instance, and comprehension, so you can actually hear people speak the language in the native accent and be able to better identify what they're saying. Course focused on countries and traditions, so this is kind of a cultural course. Maybe this will focus more on like landmarks in Spain or something like that, or Mexico, for instance. Special courses, which are, it says here, you learn idioms and practice numbers and things like that. And then words and sentences. So basically just different topics. I'm going to click on beginners courses, and it shows a little green dot next to the ones that I'm still working on. So I started on this a little while ago, and I'm still in beginners course 1, for instance. So I can basically see where I left off and choose this, and then I have all these different lessons in here. And so I can look at Mucho Gusto Part 2, and I can say click Start. And it's going to ask me up front if I want to use speech recognition or not. I will use speech recognition so that you can kind of see how the phonetic aspect looks, and I can sort of make a fool of myself with my horribly bad pronunciation of Spanish. So I'll click on continue, and what it's going to do is basically give me, well, I'll talk about it afterwards.
Mucho gusto.
So what it's showing me is basically pictures related to the sentence in some way, right? So it's a pleasure is going to be defined or translated into Spanish as mucho gusto. And the image is kind of showing me, like, say, two people meeting each other, right? So they're trying to reinforce the visual aspect with the linguistic, or sorry, not the, they're trying to reinforce the visual aspect with the written aspect so that you kind of get that association in your mind to help you memorize it better, or help you remember it better. And so
Mucho gusto.
whenever I click on it, I can hear it again. So maybe I want to better, practice the pronunciation to try and get the accent right. I can keep
Mucho gusto.
clicking on that and listening to it. And then my mic's constantly monitoring and listening for me to say the right thing. So let me...
Hasta pronto.
Well, okay, I screwed it up because I kept speaking and it didn't like that. But hasta pronto.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. So it's basically just constantly listening, and it's going to compare what you're saying, or the way you're saying it, with what they have on file. And they will be picky about it on as far as accent is concerned. They give you some leeway there. Like, obviously they don't expect people who aren't native speakers to have a native speaker accent, so they do give some leeway, but they do try and force you to at least get the pronunciation as good as you can, basically. And accents in a second language are one of the hardest things for people to actually get right, especially as you get older. The research on this is actually pretty interesting. Basically, there's a point where once you get old enough, there's basically a point where you'll never be able to get a full-blown accent in the second language. Usually only people who are younger, especially kids, are the only ones who can actually master like two different accents for two different languages. But the program still tries its best to basically get you to try and get the accent and the pronunciation as close as you can to the native speaker. And also the people who are speaking the dialogue are native speakers in this language. So you're actually hearing people who are fluent and who have the native accent, so that you're not getting somebody who maybe is a second language learner of the material and who doesn't have a proper accent. You're actually hearing somebody from the country who speaks the language, and they have the full-blown accent, so that you can really analyze that and get better at it. And so they reinforce this again with the visual and written aspects. So they want me to choose the correct translation for mucho gusto, which is it's a pleasure.
Mucho gusto.
So I just click the one that it relates to. Hasta pronto is see you soon.
Hasta pronto.
Yeah. And buenos días is good
Buenos
morning.
días.
And buenas tardes is
Buenas
good afternoon,
tardes.
evening. And then they also have the written aspects. So you actually have to type out, what's the translation for it's a pleasure? Well, it's mucho gusto. And they kind of give you a hint by giving you the word soup, I call it, of the different, or the letter soup, I guess you could say, the different letters. So they kind of give you hints there. But the main focus here is getting you to learn how to spell it properly. And then, press enter.
Mucho gusto.
And they want see you soon. We do hasta pronto. And part of why they put the text like they do here is for mobile users.
Hasta
So
pronto.
when you're actually on your phone or your mobile device, it will look just like this. So you can easily press these buttons, right, with your touch screen. Makes it rather easy. And they also fill in the, they also fill in any
Buenos días.
I guess you could say English characters, like the I and DS has the little slashed dot above the I. So they actually fill that in for you. You don't have to worry about that on your keyboard. And then I want to show one more thing here.
Buenas tardes.
So one of the lessons that I like is these complete the dialogues. So they kind of do it in this text message format. Gives you some context. In the afternoon, Jorge meets with his colleagues, Carlos and Carlos' wife, Claudia, at a restaurant. And so it kind of takes place like a conversation where you're supposed to fill in the translation. So they give you what it looks like in Spanish and the translation down below in English. So for good morning, I would say buenos dias, right? So I'd say buenos dias with the special I.
Buenos días, Carlos.
And then they have the person speak the line as well. So you can actually kind of reinforce, how would somebody actually sound if I were speaking to them in this language right now. So then there's a response of good afternoon, Jorge. It's already noon, so I would say buenas tardes, right? So you also notice that we're using the same words
Buenas
that the
tardes,
lesson's
Jorge.
been
Ya es
teaching us up to this
mediodía.
point. So we're reinforcing very specific words and phrases in every lesson. So in here I need to fill out sí for yes.
Sí, ya es tarde. ¿Y usted es?
And then she is my wife, so ella for she.
Ella es mi esposa.
And basically this just kind of goes back and forth. Hello, I'm Claudia. Hola, and then yo for I.
Hola, yo soy
And you
Claudia.
also notice some of the phrases are using words that we may have not seen yet, like usted, for instance. This is something that they're kind of showing us now to kind of get us used to it, and then we'll probably ease us into that later. And there's also some words that show up, like ella was in the first lesson. So they're also building upon what you've already learned before. So even though I haven't seen ella in this particular lesson, it was one that I got from the first lesson as well. So and it's a pleasure, just be mucho gusto.
Mucho gusto. Yo soy Jorge.
Encantada.
And then they'll also give you these little hints sometimes when there's kind of weird specific things related to a word or phrase. So then see you soon be hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto.
And then bye would be ciao. Again, that's another word that was from the first
Ciao.
lesson. And then I can continue. And then they'll also give you some of these details regarding specifics of the language that we may not be familiar with. And one thing I know I always struggled with between Spanish and English was like masculinity and feminine. I don't know how you say it. I guess you would just say, gender nouns, or I forget the exact term for it, but I always struggled with that. Like if a man's speaking, how you have to change the word endings versus if a woman's speaking. So they will cover stuff like that as well to try and reinforce that. So I don't want to go through the whole lesson. It's kind of similar stuff all around, reinforcing language and speaking, and I want to try and wrap it up soon, so I don't want to keep you all here too long. But that's kind of the gist of how the courses work. And then the last thing I'll show is the vocabulary section for basically reviewing what you've learned. So it keeps track of, as you go through lessons, it keeps track of all the words that you've learned, and it puts them into this database for you essentially. And this is for you to be able to practice and review specific terms and things that you might feel weak on. So I see the English definitions with the Spanish translations. I can click here to listen to it. I see how many times I've reviewed it, and I can set how I feel about it with my knowledge level. Like I could say, well, I know 2 is used, so I'll put that up to 6. Like I have no problem with that word. Maybe there's another word that I don't know well, like ella. Maybe I struggle with ella, and I can put it down to 1. So I can kind of set my own review and learning outcomes in here. And I can choose to review the items, and there's 3 different ways that you can review. They can do the written review, which will focus more on you typing out answers after seeing an image and the English definition like we saw in the lesson we were doing. There's also the speaking review, which will focus much more on you speaking into the microphone and listening so that you can focus more on your pronunciation or your accent. And there's also the flashcard review, which is much more of a memorization approach, right? They show you an image or they give you a definition. You have to answer it in Spanish. So I can choose flashcards, for instance. And he is going to be, I think it's L, right? And if I click this, it shows me L. And I say, yeah, I got it right. Yes would be C.
Sí.
I got that right. You is tú.
Tú.
She is ella.
Ella.
Hello is hola.
Hola.
And thank you is gracias.
Gracias.
Bye is
Ciao.
ciao. And one more would be I is yo.
Yo.
And then it's basically going to tell me what did I get right, what did I get wrong, and so I can, fine tune the next time I review and say, well, these are the words I'm bad at, these are the words I know pretty well, so I'll focus on my weaknesses or maybe bolster my strengths, whatever you want to do. So there's easy ways to review, and I think that's about all I'm going to show for the demonstration for now, and kind of get back to this so we don't run over time. So basically how Babbel gets you to mastery is in much the way that you just saw there. There's courses designed for every level, so you have beginner, intermediate level courses, and you even have courses for people that could be used by people who are fluent in the language. When you first get the program, you'll basically be tested, so it will have you go through a quick test of the language you're looking to learn, and you don't have to worry about it too much. If you do terribly, it's just going to recommend that you start in the beginner section, or if you do really well, maybe it's going to tell you, well, you could probably start in the intermediate section. But you don't have to follow that advice. You can still use the program however you want to use it. It's just that Babbel tries to kind of get you started on the right foot, essentially. So Babbel's effective because the content of the material is generally relevant to kind of like everyday life. You're dealing with like words and phrases that you might use in a conversation with somebody. And the weird example I always use is sometimes you'll use some kind of language learning program, and you'll get these phrases that just try to throw as much like word spaghetti in as possible. Like maybe you just learned how to say table, and you learned how to say tall, and you learned how to say blue, right? And so they'll start throwing sentences together like the blue dog stands on the tall table, right? And it's like, yeah, you can piece those words together and figure it out, but that's a really weird saying. It's a really weird sentence, and it's not really something you're going to find yourself ever saying in a conversation, hopefully, unless you know a lot of blue dogs. So Babbel tries to focus much more on, conversating and things that you might actually be talking to somebody about if you like visited that country, for instance. The lessons are voiced by native speakers. I touched on that during the demonstration, so this is helpful for learning the listening and speaking aspect. Speech recognition helps reinforce that you're using the proper pronunciation and everything, right? I mentioned that during the demonstration. And I showed you the vocabulary section, which is the review sessions to help you reinforce your learning. And probably one of the more important bits is that the lessons are only about 10 to 15 minutes long. And what's nice with this is that it easily fits into people with busy schedules, right? So it's not a huge commitment for you to boot up a lesson and go through it and get some learning in. And a lot of the research, the linguistics research, has actually shown that you can effectively learn a language given enough time if you're only spending about 40 minutes a day on lessons. So basically, if you spend 40 minutes a day learning another language, just doing simple lessons like this, given a year or so, you're actually going to be learning quite a bit of the language. You actually don't need to spend like 4 or 5 hours a day on it. Like some people might think that, but it can sometimes be counterproductive. So 10 to 15 minute lessons are actually really nice, not only for the schedule aspect, but for the cognitive aspect. The research basically shows that this is kind of the fine-tuned timing window that makes the most sense for learning a language in an effective way with people who have busy schedules. The content's relevant, like I was mentioning. You're not talking about blue dogs on top of tall tables, for instance. And then the portability aspect is a big one. It's available anytime, anywhere. If you have an internet connection, you can get to the website and you can access it. And if you have a mobile device, you can get the app and access it. If you have Chromebooks, right? Chromebooks are really popular in schools right now. If you have a Chromebook, there's a Google Chrome extension for Babbel, so you can actually just get the extension right into the Chrome browser and use it. So it's highly flexible in that way. So why do educators choose Babbel? Well, all those reasons I just listed are good ones. But one of the more important ones is that it's affordable, right? Especially in the K through 12 section. Many schools are struggling with budgets, and especially in the language learning section, most schools are underfunded. So how can you get a meaningful language learning tool or solution for your classroom when you already are not getting a lot of money. You need to find affordable solutions that are easy to use, and Babbel fits those criteria. And it's available on every device. Like I said, I've hit portability a lot, and the reason I touch on that a lot is because in school you're going to have a lot of students who are using a lot of different devices. You might have students running Mac at home, you might have students running PC, you might have a student running Linux at home, you know. You might have students that don't even have desktop computers, they just have mobile devices. And so a big problem then becomes, well, how do I make sure all my students can actually use the software I'm looking to get, you know, and that I'm not going to have a few students who are maybe using some obscure device. How do I make sure that all my students can actually make use of this? I mean, Babbel is pretty much universal. Like I said, if your device can connect to the internet, if it has a web browser, or if it has the Babbel app on it, like Android, iOS has, then you can use it. And like I mentioned, Chromebooks even, there's often a big restriction where Chromebooks can't install traditional software, right? Because it's not really an operating system. But Babbel doesn't matter. Like on a Chromebook, you can just boot up Chrome and go to Babbel and use it. And what's nice is the progress is actually synced among all these devices. So you could even have in your classroom, maybe you have a lab full of computers where students are using Babbel, and you can then assign homework and say, okay, let's go home now, and you're going to have to do 2 units and report to me about your progress or whatever. That progress that they went through on their account in class is synced with any of their devices that are running their account. So if they go home and they go on their iPhone or their Android device or whatever, and use Babbel, they'll basically be at the same place they were at in class at school. Another big reason Babbel's effective in education is because it's actually a great solution for the learning trends we talked about earlier. For immersive learning, we have to consider, maybe language software is not as necessary in such an environment, but you do have to wonder about what do students do for homework, right? Because language immersion focuses on surrounding the student with the language, but 99% chance they go home and they're going to be surrounded by the language they speak, not the language they're learning in class. So how can you ensure that they go home and actually are still working on their language somehow? That's where solutions like Babbel come into play, because it's easy for them to go home, do 1 or 2 15-minute lessons, and that's their homework, right? Also, with Babbel, they do have cultural courses, and that's also a big focus in language immersion, is cultural awareness and having people learn about those cultures. And so Babbel does kind of reinforce that as well. Then when we talk about blended and distance learning, both of those approaches basically require some kind of software solution, because both of them require a distance learning component. And pretty much the most effective way to assign homework and things like that for students in a distance learning environment is through some kind of software, at least for language learning. And so having a program like Babbel is great for those situations. So one thing I will touch on, this is pretty new and something that we learned about pretty recently, but there is a license management system with Babbel that I believe is currently available if upon request. It's in beta stages right now, but basically the idea is that you'll have a centralized solution for licensing, and that will use invitation system instead of license codes. So you can have like I guess you could call them like a license coordinator if you want, like somebody who will basically be dishing out licenses to people on campus or people in the class, right? And so you'll be able to keep track of those invitations. You'll be able to keep track of current users and things like that. Like I said, it is beta stages currently, but it's available upon request, and they are working really heavy on this feature, and they're trying to improve it constantly and further develop it. So I just wanted to point that out, that is a thing that exists, and it will be even more robust and available in the near future. So one thing that we're excited to talk about is that you can actually get a free personal copy just by being here on the webinar. Basically, if you email marketing@studica.com and use BabFree as your subject line, we'll provide you with instructions on how you can get a 6-month personal license. And the personal license is basically all features, all access, so you can use the program and unrestricted and do what you want to do with it. So the idea is to see if you like Babbel and see if it will fit your needs in your classroom, and we're willing to give that to you for free. So again, free copy. You basically send an email to marketing@studica.com and put in your subject line Bab free, all caps, and we'll get back to you with information on how you can get that. So with that, I'll open it up for questions, and it looks like I don't have anybody in here, so I don't think I'll have any questions. Okay, well, with that, I'll go ahead and close it out. So we do have more information on our website, studica.com/Babbel-for-education. You can also go to Google and just type Studica Babbel, and you should find all of our Babbel offerings. You can also email us at sales@studica.com if you have specific sales-related questions, or really just any questions at all. Our sales staff are really knowledgeable about the product and about some of the specifics that schools have to work with. So I do recommend, if you have questions, contact them. You can also call us at 888-561-7521 from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday. Again, that's 9 a.m. 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday. And those of you who did attend and were signed up will get a follow-up email with more information about Babbel, and you'll also get a recording of this webinar. So if you need to show it to anybody or anything like that, you can do so. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.